Today, in the world, we have a lot of people whose hearts are hard. Certainly, I hope that's not our attitude. It is possible for us to have that attitude. Look at Hebrews chapter 3. Let's see what the Hebrew writer says. Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 15. The Hebrew writer is cautioning Christians against having a hardness of heart. Hebrews 3 verse 15, the Hebrew writer says, as it is said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. He's looking back where we're studying on Wednesday nights, kids. We haven't quite reached this study in our Wednesday night lessons, but we're going to come to a point where the children of Israel rebel against God, which makes absolutely no sense. This is the God who saved them from slavery. He saved them from having to kill their children. He brought them safe out of Egypt across the Red Sea. And they rebelled. They created an idol. And they worshipped an idol instead of God. They rebelled against God and they rebelled against Moses for no reason whatsoever. The Hebrew writer says today, if you hear God's voice, you see God's instruction, don't harden that heart. All you're going to do is create another callous. He says, for those who heard and yet rebelled, was it not all those who left Egypt led by Moses? And with whom he was provoked 40 years. Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. The people who rebelled against God were the adults, 20 years old and up. Rebelled against God. God didn't hold it against the kids because they weren't able to make their own decisions. But everyone from 20 years old and upward died in the desert because God said they will not enter the promised land. Today, if we rebel against God, if we harden our heart, put that callus around our heart, and don't feel the pricks in our hearts, we will not enter the rest of God. Today, in the society in which we live, I think last week they arrested another individual who had announced publicly and had plans to shoot at 3 schools, and I think it was, don't hold me to this, several churches. He planned mass shootings. There are people who want to stamp out Christianity on all levels. These are people in whom the milk of human kindness is curdled. Who can go into a grade school and shoot 9-year-old children? It's certainly someone who is bitter and angry. And yet Jesus died for those individuals the same as he died for anyone else. Maybe you and I may not be guilty of shooting 9-year-old children. But I know, and I can attest, and I can speak to, that I've had hardness in my heart, in my life. You know, perhaps even worse than someone who would walk into a grade school and shoot 9-year-old children is the person who hears the gospel, the good news of Christ, and puts off becoming a Christian. Again, voice of experience. I was 22 and a half years old before I became a Christian. And I can tell you every year that I put off becoming, every time I put off becoming a Christian, it became easier. Every time I put off doing something that I know is right, it becomes easier. The question for me was, finally it boiled down to, was I a soldier at the cross? Was I one of the soldiers who was mocking Jesus, making fun of him, nailing him to his cross? Or was I a soldier of the cross? Was I willing to put my shoulder to work for Jesus as best I could? The sixth thing we see here in Matthew chapter 27 is found in verse 36. And that is a casual indifference. I want you to notice something here. There's almost a, yes, there's a hardness of heart, but this is something that the attitude seems to be, it doesn't affect me. They're indifferent. Verse 36 says, and they sat down and kept watch over him there. And over his head they put a charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." Now, I want you to notice there's a group of people watching. They're standing by. Some of the other Gospels give us a little bit more vivid description of them. They're standing by. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have television. This is the entertainment of the day. To watch someone be crucified. They're standing there. They're looking at Jesus. Saying, well, it doesn't affect me. They should be looking to Jesus instead of at him. And I think really, truthfully, this is kind of where a lot of Christians can be today. It's easy to be a Christian today and say, it doesn't affect me. We can have that attitude about abortions. We can have that attitude about school shootings. After all, we live in a very nice place in this country. We haven't experienced school shootings. We don't have an abortion clinic around here. As for gay pride rallies, well, it doesn't affect me what someone else does in their bedroom. The truth is, everything in society, everything in the world around us has an effect on us and upon our children. Matthew chapter 7, and in verse 21, notice Jesus' words. This is Jesus himself. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Not every person who acknowledges that Jesus is Christ is going to go to heaven for eternity. Jesus says, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Friends, we sit on our backsides as Christians way too much. Way too much. We're silent because we think we're the majority. And the silent majority will eventually become the silent minority as things slip away from us. If we are indifferent to sin in the world and even sometimes sin in the church.